Hello and welcome to Remember, the show all about histories, mysteries. And did you know that Formosa, which is the old name for Taiwan, is Portuguese for beautiful island, even though the Portuguese never went there?
Oh, well, huh. I didn't know that, and that strikes me as odd.
They just saw it, thought, that's a mighty fine looking island, and everyone went Formosa. That's a nice name.
It's a beautiful island. That's a place I want to go to there.
You will die of malaria, but more on that later.
But it's gonna look so pretty while you're dying.
Hey everyone, with me as always is the Otter Princess, Paula Deming.
Thank you. What a beautiful way to be introduced.
I, however, traded my name to Dutch merchants in a hostage negotiation that I was frankly irresponsibly put in charge of. This week, we are off to the wild, wild East, Taiwan, in the early 1700s. And I mean the wild East really in the same way as the wild West.
Because it got cowboys? Do they all say yeehaw in Portuguese for some reason, even though the Portuguese had never been there?
They definitely don't say anything in Portuguese other than the word Formosa. So Taiwan is an island about the size of Belgium off the coast of China. And while the history of so many parts of East Asia is thousands of years old, in many ways, Taiwan's history just isn't. Of course, there have been people there for thousands of years. The island is, and certainly was, home to many different Aboriginal peoples. But as far as written history, Taiwan has only really got scattered mentions in Chinese writings up until the 16th century, normally within the footnote of a shipwreck. Taiwan had a real issue with shipwrecks. I think the quote is, at one point, 99% of the Western people on Taiwan were shipwrecked there.
So it sounds like Taiwan is like the siren of land masses, right?
Oh, very much so.
You know, like be roped in by my beauty, and then bam, you got, son.
Really what was happening was most people were trying to get from the Philippines to Japan or from Japan to the Philippines to do trade. And if they needed to moor somewhere, Taiwan's the only place you can stop. The only problem with Taiwan is as a non-developed landmass, there's no lighthouses and basically no safe harbors almost at all. So people would just kind of like get dashed against the rock. And Taiwan really did have a problem with literal head hunting native peoples.
They literally they would wait by the rocks, and then when people crashed there, they would cut their heads off?
Very much so. There were certain tribes on Taiwan where that was a rite of passage for men to take a head. Yeah.
I don't like it.
Well, neither did the people whose last words were, "Hello, I'm Dutch. Nice to meet you."
And they're like, perfect. Just in time for me to come of age. Ha-ka!
Why do all the baddies in your mind have English accents, even if they're literally Taiwanese Aboriginal
Did I
peoples?
do an English accent?
Yeah, you went, I'm coming of age. Replay it.
Oi! It's time for me to come of age. Ha-ka!
While there are just countless fascinating historical stories that do take place on Taiwan, from the siege of Fort Zealandia to the exile of the Chinese nationalists forming the Republic of China, or Taiwan, nothing ever caught my imagination as much as the story of the Duck King, a man who went from pauper to emperor in 1721.
I thought you were going to say in 17 days. And I was like, this is going to be a great story. But then it was just a year, and I'm like, okay, it's going to be a less great story, but probably still pretty good.
Wow.
We'll take you from pauper to emperor in 17 days as you sign up for my seminar right now. Time's running out. Sign up right now.
Drop shipping from China. It's the only way to get rich. So it's the 18th century, a time when the Qing dynasty ruled Taiwan. Not the whole country, because this is the Wild East after all, but much outside of the West really was a no-go place for the Chinese. But Taiwan has been made part of Fujian Prefecture. And frankly, people on Taiwan aren't all thrilled about this. Many of the people on the island, which was for a time... Okay, so The Dutch were kind of in charge for a while.
Okay.
They were like the de facto rulers after setting up trading ports, which ended up with a fortified fort.
They were like, we keep crashing here. We might as well, like, let's turn lemons into lemonade, set up some
Exactly.
trading ports, make ourselves be in charge.
Essentially, they make this big fort called Fort Zeelandia. There's another fort as well. And
Fort
they want
Zeelandia? Was there
Zeelandia.
was it run by a fox and a rabbit cop duo?
This is the fort. Who's going to run this fort? Ants. Get it? Zoolandia.
Got
it's
it.
Fine.
Yes, that is probably a better joke than my Zootopia joke I made.
you.
See how mine was like adjacent? Yeah.
So you have to imagine the Dutch were there and they were kind of de facto rulers, but they never ruled Taiwan in what you would call a colonial sense. They had a trading port there and they certainly had some armed fighters there, but this was all set up by the Dutch East India Company. This wasn't the Dutch Empire. This was a company. It wasn't necessarily the Dutch. There's lots of people in the Dutch East India Company that weren't even Dutch. But then this guy called Ko Chinga turns up. He wants Taiwan for himself to set up this last bastion of the outgoing Chinese Ming dynasty. And he's got all these hopes of retaking mainland China, which was now under Qing dynasty control. Long story short, there's a very short-lived kingdom of Dongning, but the Qing put an end to it, and pretty much there's a lot of people on Taiwan that don't want to be ruled by the Qing. And native Taiwanese people, of course, but also a lot of the Taiwanese people there, the Han Chinese, were there for a better life, and they don't want all this turmoil.
So they came from mainland China to Taiwan, and then we're like, leave that nonsense there on mainland China. We came here for a reason.
They came here to be pioneers, to settlers, take this land and make the best they can from it. It really does echo what happened later on in history, because you imagine that the Qing come into China, take over, the Ming dynasty go to Taiwan, and then they have hopes of retaking mainland China. And that's incredibly similar how history repeats itself, because that's very similar to when the communists took over China and the nationalists had to leave and they went to Taiwan. And that's what Taiwan is now. That's why it's the Republic of China, Taiwan. It's just funny how history repeats itself like that.
It is. It's patterns that we kind of find ourselves falling into a little bit.
A better life on Taiwan didn't necessarily mean an easier life. While the other land in Fujian Prefecture, this is land on the Chinese mainland, back over the Taiwan Strait, was essentially terrible as far as agriculture was concerned. It's pretty much all mountains. Taiwan came with its own difficulties. Of course, they were getting murdered by Aborigines, but there's something that almost everyone who ventured onto the island would at some point have to deal with disease. Malaria was the main one, but yellow fever, typhoid, they were all absolutely rampant. And there's more good reasons to stick to the southwest of the island. It was closer to the mainland, China, but also the whole of Taiwan, but especially the east, just to this day gets battered by typhoons. There's actually a long-lasting piece of advice, which is if you want to invade Taiwan, you should do it in April, because otherwise the seas are just way too unpredictable.
It's important when you're planning an invasion, it's important to plan it for like nice weather. It's like planning a holiday, right? You're like, when's
Very
the
much
best
so.
time to visit Italy? I've Googled such things. And it's like that when you're planning an invasion. One, you don't want to go on the height of summer because it's going to be super hot and all the kids are going to be out of school. So it's going to be really crowded. You need to go, but when the weather's nice, but before school gets out. And April fits in pretty well with that, really.
Very much so. I went to Taiwan in April and I did see
did.
it as an invasion.
You invaded, that's right. But you also got some rain, didn't you?
Oh, mate. It rained a lot. It rained so much in Tainan. It was crazy. So these people, the Han Chinese, are on Taiwan and they're trying to make a better life. And all this prosperity and hardship on the island is compounded by the Qing, who put into place some really overzealous restrictions and sanctions onto the island. The officials were all outsiders to Taiwan, massive taxes with nothing to show for it. Essentially, it would be like if we were all paying taxes in my town for things to be built and supplied to Paula's town.
I mean, as an American, I understand this concept very well. We put our middle fingers up in the air to you folks across the pond for these sorts of taxation things.
I did add to Paula's town with her snooty friends and high sense of superiority, but I thought I'd let you say something, because I knew you couldn't help yourself. The other thing that wasn't supplied by the Chinese was any type of protection on the island from the Aboriginal people that were there. As far as the Han Taiwanese were concerned, this was a massive problem.
Yeah. I mean, it's like, here's people who lived here before us, who are not happy we're here, who have a habit of cutting off heads, who we would like to be protected from. We're paying money to a government across the way who's then not really offering anything to us in return
There's
for
lots of
that
really
money.
strange. There's lots of really strange laws. One of them is that the Taiwanese weren't allowed to fortify their towns. They weren't allowed to put walls up because there was worry that rebels would take over the town and use the walls to protect it, so it'd be harder to take over. They thought it'd just be easier just to have towns get taken over and then just retake them.
Oh, boy. Poor people who lived there. They're like, come on, I don't want to get taken over and be retaken.
And when I say Aborigines, by the way, I do mean Aborigines in very much the same sense as South Seas peoples and Australian people, like original people, because there's very strong DNA evidence to suggest that those Aboriginal peoples came down and they settled in Taiwan first before going to the South Seas and before going to Australia. So it's those people.
They just want to live in their land. They don't want someone coming over and taking over where they currently are trying to live.
Travel and trade with mainland China was then really restricted as well. There's just massive amounts of bureaucracy and red tape. Everything needed a license, and the only port that was open was in Tainan, in the south, which Taiwan is a small place, but if you're extracting camphor in the north, you now need to first get it all the way down to the south to move it on. And all that is on top of the fact that women had been banned from going to Taiwan. So let's just say,
I'm sorry.
lots of different tensions were very high.
Why were women banned from going there? How are they didn't want like a population to grow in this place?
Seemingly that's part of it, because if you have women there, you can kind of build a civilization. You can't build anything without women there. It kind of forced you to say, if you're going to Taiwan, you're going there to work. You're not going there to play.
I thought that these people went to Taiwan to get away from...
So remember, the Aboriginal people were there first,
Right.
let's be clear, and some Chinese settlers were there, Han Chinese. Then the Dutch put up a trading post. Then Kochinga from the Ming dynasty
Right.
came over and took over Taiwan.
Okay.
Then, after this very small-lived kingdom of Don Ning happened, the Qing dynasty came to Taiwan and took over. So Taiwan had been taken over by the Qing.
Got it. I think my brain missed that step between the Ming and the Qing dynasties, like who was kind of in charge. So the Qing dynasty came over and was like, no, this is ours.
So you have to think as well that a lot of the people who went to Taiwan went there whilst the Ming were in charge.
Yeah. And now
these
the Qing have taken over, and they're like...
And they're putting in all these rules.
to keep these people down because they know they left because they didn't want to be ruled by the Qing.
So enter Chu Yi-gui, a 33-year-old immigrant to Taiwan from Fujian, and he was pretty much just another Chinese farmer in Kaohsiung. It's a little district called Naiman. Before he became the Duck King, but for a few months, he elevated himself from obscurity to something that has seemed impossible to others that had tried. During the 200 years of Qing rule, there was one revolution or rebellion every 3 years.
Wow, for 200 years, every 3 years. It's like an election cycle.
Chewy Gray was the first of what are known as the three great uprisings. But the Qing had a saying for what happened in what they considered a backwater island. Minor unrest every 3 years, major unrest every 5 years.
Oh my gosh.
So Chewy Gray is farming ducks. I'm not sure if that means using ducks to farm like they do in the Philippines, they rotate ducks into rice fields to eat all the pests and clean up the paddies and stuff.
Oh, that's
Yeah, they use ducks.
Oh my gosh, I didn't know that.
It's like if you've got an allotment and you've got lots of like big vegetable garden, it's great to have chickens and ducks because they'll just come in and eat all the bugs and also do some fertilizing while they do it.
Makes sense.
It's fantastic. On the other hand, they could have meant that they were rearing ducks for food, but either way, he's farming ducks.
Either way, he is the king of it.
He's the king of ducks.
He goes
He's
around
like
everywhere
the original
going,
Burger
quack,
King.
Quack,
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 quack, quack. Talking about flying V's, people are like, that is a reference that no one is going to understand for hundreds of years. He's like, I'm ahead of my time.
There's a legend that he can make his ducks march to the beat of a drum, which I imagine, en masse, would have been less foreboding and more
It's so
just adorable.
cute. Just imagine them all.
Paula, I love ducks.
I
It's
know.
a big part of my personality.
You love ducks. You love anything that has a little waddly butt.
I do. So at this time, a new magistrate and his son roll into town to be frankly not great. And this really ramps up the animosity between the people and the Qing rulers over on the mainland. And so the lads get together.
Because they're only lads.
Because they're all lads, basically.
They're all lads,
And
lads.
the idea that there was absolutely no women on Taiwan
There's got to be,
erroneous,
at least in the Aboriginal people, there certainly are, but yeah.
Of course, and you have to imagine that there were certain Aboriginal women that were taken into
I would think.
Han Chinese settlements and that type of thing, and there were certainly a few women who had made it over on boats and stuff,
There's
and
probably,
women
like,
who were there beforehand.
Women who like disguise themselves as men to be able to get over there and like do their thing, and I'm always fascinated by those kinds of stories.
But also to be reunited with their loved ones.
Yeah.
If a father and 3 sons are all on Taiwan, I'm sure the mother would like to be there, or one of the sisters, so. But there were not a lot of women, let's be clear.
I mean, honestly, if you're like, I cannot find anybody to marry in mainland China, I know where to go, where I'm going to be so popular. Look,
Oh, yeah.
I'm a
Hugely
mainland
popular.
3 and a Taiwan 8 because there are
Exactly.
no other options there.
So as I say, so the lads get together.
That's right, the
and
lads.
decide to do a revolt. And they pick Chu as their leader. Now, the reason they pick Chu isn't because he's proven himself in the heat of battle, but it's because of his name, Chu Yi Gui. The Chu bit, which is the last name, that's the family name, happens to be the same family name as the rulers of the Ming dynasty.
Oh, interesting.
So Chu Yi Gui had claimed also to be related to those previous emperors. Probably wasn't. Not a very uncommon last name, but
Right.
he certainly said, yes, my heritage. For some context here, the Ming had fled to Taiwan almost 40 years ago to escape the Qing, holding out on Taiwan to hopefully one day retake the mainland. So in a way, this made perfect sense. In other ways, it sure didn't. But sometimes you don't need much of an excuse to do the thing that you wanted to do.
Right.
And this, again, would be history repeating itself because the Ming emperor, who overthrew the Mongols, also started off as a farmer to become an emperor. So why not do that again?
Why not? Yes.
How hard can it be?
Banners with ducks all over them.
They're just the most unforeboding creatures.
Everyone's helmets look like duck beaks.
See, I think it writes itself.
It's
They should do a Mighty Ducks
Great.
movie where they go back in time.
yes.
So things start off small, about 50 men attacking outposts and such, but grows just incredibly quickly. Essentially, everyone just needs an excuse, right, to start rebelling.
Yeah, everyone wanted to do it, and they just needed to see other people doing it to feel like they could, kind of, to give them like permission to try.
And this also has a uniting effect on the people on Taiwan because it's all helped by a guy called Du Yuanying. He's a hacker man, which is a people group from the Chinese mainland, and together they do some really great first strikes. But a lot of the success they get really comes from the missteps of the Qing officials. So bounties are put on their heads, and the Qing encouraged the Plains Aboriginal peoples, who they were allies with, to go and take the heads of the Duck King rebels. But who's going to check the identity of the heads that they brought in? So this leads, of course, to the wrong heads being taken and only worked to unite the peoples behind the rebels against the Qing, growing their ranks to thousands.
Gotta rise up against the man,
This all comes down to a showdown in Taiwan's capital at that time, Tainan.
I'm trying to tie it in to it being just like the Wild West is what you said
like
earlier.
The Wild West.
Howdy, partner. I heard that you thought that you had my head, but guess what? Looks like my head is still on these two shoulders.
So, though the government is better armed, the Duck King and his rebels force the government to flee, and the rebels win. So Taiwan now has an emperor, the Duck King. Well, almost all of Taiwan. There are still a few places up north that are still part of the Qing Empire and still under their control. Because you have to remember, a lot of the island is still wild at this point. And also, Taiwan, it's basically all mountains, other than the coast. Chewie Gui settles into the role. He probably wasn't expecting to be emperor, so without anything official on hand, he dresses in some clothes from just Chinese operas.
Oh my gosh.
And he takes the title that means everlasting peace.
Aww.
Now, hubris is probably the biggest driver of history, and the everlasting peace lasts less than 2 months.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, that's not very everlasting.
Apparently, the plays that were being put on at the time in Chinese opera were about like the Ming Dynasty a lot of the time. So wearing those clothes did kind of fit in some ways.
So he was wearing things that like kind of reflected this idea of the Ming Dynasty.
As best as they could get, yeah. The story is that there was a lot of infighting right from the get-go in this new regime, but the Qing are fairly quick to send in the boys and roast themselves some duck.
Oh, you were so proud when you wrote that.
I was. A Qing force of almost 20,000 is amassed and sent out over 100 ships to retake Tainan. The force quickly overwhelms Tainan, and the majority of the rebels flee, and Chewie Gui is taken after ruling Taiwan for just 50 days.
Yeah.
Unfortunately for Chewie Gui, he's shipped off to Peking, which is modern-day Beijing, and he's executed in a way almost unimaginable.
Ugh.
Death by 1,000 cuts.
Seriously? That's like a real thing?
Yeah, and it's exactly what it sounds like. And just like that, one of over 100 rebellions was quashed. His rebellion wasn't the last. It wasn't the bloodiest. But it was the only one to take the capital. And it's the one with, let's be honest, the best name.
Yeah.
If you want to see the Duck King, then you can. There's a statue of him, a couple in fact.
Yeah?
I really wanted to see them while I was in Kaohsiung, but they're kind of quite out of the city. You'd have to rent a moped to go and see them. But in Naiman, you could go up and see there's a temple. The Chinese Nationalist Party, the KMT, the regime that controlled Taiwan between 1945 and 2000, they really lionized the Taiwanese who had fought the Qing or fought the Japanese. And to celebrate the exploits of Chewie Gui, in 1998, the government unveiled and you have to forgive me for this, the Yamilao Chewie Gui Cultural Park in Naimen, which is where you can see some statues. Among the statues, there are two of Chew, And there's also a massive statue of a duck on top a sealed well, which is where Chu is said to have gotten his water. And this is from the Taipei Times now. That, quote, in a way, Chu is honoured as a deity who can protect Tainan because he would know better than anyone how to keep invaders out, as he was the only invader that got it. End quote. There's also another shrine devoted to Chu in Kaohsiung's Linyuan district, and the rumour is that during the Japanese colonial rule, Taiwan has had a lot of changing of hands. During the Japanese colonial rule, a local man seeking a cure for his mother's illness passed this spot late at night, and to his surprise, he saw a large group of ducks that quacked loudly,
Quack,
then
quack,
disappeared.
quack, quack.
In the days and weeks
Spiritual
that followed,
ducks.
yeah, spiritual ducks. And in the days and weeks that followed, people in the area kept dreaming about Chu, and this combined with a sudden and inexplicable recovery of the man's mother, prompted residents to establish an altar so they could
Wow.
offer incense to the
Aw.
long-deceased duck farmer.
That's nice.
His kingdom may have swiftly crumbled, but 2 centuries after his death, the Duck King was still inspiring awe among the Taiwanese.
I just feel really bad for him because he just wanted to be treated right by his government, right? That's my impression of this story. And other people said, you should be the one to lead us. It somehow worked. He's now suddenly in charge, and now he's suddenly dead. And I feel bad for him. It's kind of tragic.
He was a freedom fighter.
Yeah.
And he was only our age, younger. I think he was
33,
I
you said. Oh.
I want to say that I absolutely couldn't have made this episode if it hadn't been for a couple of articles from the Taiwan in Times series from the Taipei Times and an episode on this topic from the podcast Formosa Files, which is the only English language Taiwan history podcast. And I've listened to every episode of it because it's absolutely fantastic. And if you really want to dive deep into Taiwanese history, it's the number one place I'd advise you to go. It's really good, and that's Formosa Files, which I will absolutely link below.
Yeah.
They've told this story as well on their podcast. I've tried to add things myself and make it our own, but they really cover so many amazing topics about Taiwan's history. They're the reason I wanted to go to Taiwan, and it's a fantastic podcast. It's Taiwan-centric, but they cover a lot of other things and kind of go a few other places. But it's a fantastic podcast, and I really highly recommend it. So thank you to Formosa Files for making that show, because it's really good.
Thank you to you, too, for presenting this. This is a part of the world where I don't know that much about the history of this part of the world, right? And it's nice to learn about it. It's nice to learn something, especially having a little bit of familiarity with at least some of the place names because of you just traveling to Taiwan and, seeing videos of your travels and hearing you talk about it, lends a little bit of context. I can picture what it looks like. And yeah, this was really, really interesting. And now I think I might look a little differently at ducks from now on, honestly.
What better than a Duck King? I mean, really.
Quack. Thank you so much for watching this episode of Remember, all about the Duck King. If you would like to listen to these, we also release them as a traditional podcast on whatever podcatcher you like to listen to your podcasts on.
A traditional podcast, just like your grandfather used to make.
Just like your grandfather used to make or listen to. You can also leave traditional reviews of the podcast wherever you listen. 5-star ratings, please. If you don't like the show, just leave us alone. That's fine. But if you like the show, subscribe to this YouTube channel. Let us know what you think. Did you already know about this story? Are you familiar with the Formosa Files? Let us know in the comments below what you think. And thumbs up the video because that helps us in the algorithm, which gets us in front of more people who might also enjoy this content. And we'd really like that. Is there a bit of personal history in your life that you think might be interesting for us to talk about on the show? Let us know. Or if you have a topic you would like us to dive into, you can suggest that as well. That can all get sent to remembershow@gmail.com via email.
Also, bonus points if you can recommend a story that's very animal-based.
We like animals.
I saw Paula once, and you won't believe this. I saw her kick a gerbil.
You won't believe it because it didn't happen. That's Matthew Jude. I'm Paula Deming. We'll see you next time.
Bye, Mom.